Welcome to the CPTM Smart Partners Hub, and particularly welcome to the CPTM Fellows Green Room. Today is 22nd of October 2015, and I'm very glad that after so many weeks I'm able to send some messages more than in writing, but in directly addressing all of you, because quite a number of things have happened which cannot be put in writing or in emails or in books, but they have to be felt, visualized or otherwise. So right now with me I have we have one of the founders in the Club of Rome, and as we know, we are very much within the CPTM and the Commonwealth and Smart Partnership movement aware and involved or influenced or kind of take part in one or another in the Club of Rome for many years, since Alexander King's intervention. So Keith is not new to us, he's a member. In fact, he's a professional, he's a fellow, I suppose. And we were together last week at the annual conference of the Club of Rome, which took place this year in the International Secretariat Center in Winterthur in Switzerland. So it was the Club of Rome date, the meeting of the Club of Rome was quite probably strategically placed before the COP21 in Paris at the end of beginning of December. Usually it happens around this time, but this time was quite well positioned, and it was one of the largest get-together of people involved in Club of Rome. Some founders. As we know, the Club of Rome is still kind of known and growing in importance, of Limits to Growth report in 1972 already, but there are many other reports to Club of Rome which kind of derived from within that spirit to try to deal with global problematic. And we within the group, within the Commonwealth and beyond, including fellows, heads of government, have benefited, or the other way around, from their wisdom. The global problematic I was trying to introduce with a question, Keith. Keith, I mean, this is a novel, very, very novel description of a global problematic, because this is a globe but which is not powered by battery or electricity or anything. It is literally a very latest innovation which moves due to light and interaction with gravitational forces. Now Australia is somewhere, is here, but that wasn't the point where you're from. But the point was, when we are saying that in this annual meeting of the Club of Rome last week, that prosperity can be discussed within limits. I mean, looking at this globe, which moves without electricity, without...
Incredible.
I mean, it is with light, but it could be sunlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Using gravitational forces.
Yeah.
While we say prosperity within limits, there could be prosperity and limitless.
Yeah.
But why aren't they limitless? Is it because...
Well, I think for me the value, going back to the 1972 Limits to Growth report, so that argued that it was a warning, it wasn't a prediction, but it was a warning that we're by the middle of the 21st century, we'll start running out of resources. We will have environmental problems. We'll have problems with population, etc. And in a sense, we're now living with two scenarios, it seems to me. One scenario is this one of predicting that we're going to be running into problems for the middle of the 21st century, increasing issues of poverty, growing gap between the rich and the poor. In my own view, the poor are getting richer, but they're getting richer slower than the rich are getting richer. Relatively. So you've got a growing gap. So on the one hand, you've got a scenario which is talking about increasing global problems. But at the same time, there's a second scenario which is looking at changes that could be made, changes which are local, not reliant upon government necessarily, but using individual initiative. So at the Club of Rome meeting, for example, we heard a report on the blue planet, this notion that everything on Earth gets recycled. It's when humans came along, they invented pollution. Prior to that time, we didn't have pollution before about 1750 to any great extent. Humans came along and invented the pollution, because in nature everything gets recycled. So the body of a dead animal gets recycled, becomes nourishment to enable the tree to grow, etc. Humans come along and they interrupt that natural cycle. So one of the things that I found very optimistic from the Club of Rome meeting was this notion of the cyclical economy, the cycle. So in other words, you start to recycle stuff. Linked to that also was another a report on called the performance economy, which seems to me that in the very beginning, the Industrial Revolution, 1750, you get the linear industrial economy, LIE. So that is the production system where you just grind away, you produce your car, but you also produce a lot of pollution to go along with it. Then the second development, which has been, I've already talked on, which is the idea of recycling as much as possible. And then taking it to the next stage, which is the performance economy, whereby you really don't buy the car, you hire it. So at the end of 5 years, it goes back to the car company, and that gives the car company an incentive to make sure that everything they use in making the car can be recycled, because they're going to get the junk back at the end. So this is the performance economy. So you're not buying products, you're in effect hiring them long term.
Yeah, the Michelin example,
the Michelin
you don't
example.
buy tire.
Yeah.
Or
So this
the
I found.
intelligent design.
Sorry?
In the intelligent design. Yeah.
So what we're looking at then, I think, with the Club of Rome, if you take the macro view of what the Club of Rome is about, one is still this warning. We had a report from Ugo Bardi about the exhaustion of raw materials. So that is certainly... So on the one hand, we're getting this scenario warning us about the increasing problems, but at the same time, we can also listen out for these faint signals of change, showing how we're actually getting, in a small way, a number of individual initiatives coming together which will produce a new economy. And of course, one of the issues that we looked at the Club of Rome meeting was the whole question of governance. Namely, how do you involve the politicians? How do you get national government involvement? And I think there is much more that needs to be done in that area, because I think that you just look at the disengagement that you now find amongst voters. It's interesting to note in the United States, the more Americans vote in American Idol than vote in presidential contests. So you've got people who are just disengaged from voting. Disengaged from the political system. So we need to find a way of getting people back involved, and for national governments to get back in the business of governing. I think too much of their work has been outsourced, relying simply too much on the market, and I think we've got to find a way of reinventing government and how we do things.
I think what became quite obvious this year there were these three big sessions with different dimensions about defining maybe a new economic system. Within which prosperity within limits. But then there was, what are the limits? So in such a way that, as you were mentioning, the world doesn't end. It doesn't collapse. There is no collapse. And then in what way the world politics can adapt actually to this prosperity within limits, or the other way around. So there was also within that the discussion of probably the more and more complex interconnectedness and the kind of modeling that was used limits or the systems analysis for SDG, the
Sustainable
Development Goals.
Yeah.
Probably they are not quite, there are no methodological yet accepted approaches for dealing with this complexity that is we are more aware than before.
Yeah.
And if you add, as we were discussing a bit before, this metadata and all the rest of it makes patterns very opaque. So networks, that's why there was,
So what is also important is Moore's law, the doubling power of computers. So this is the game changer, I think, that because it obviously has a bearing on metadata in terms of communications. So you've got this doubling power of computers. And of course the Club of Rome has said we're about halfway through the chessboard. If you remember the story of the invention of the game of chess, the inventor was to be rewarded with anything that he wanted. So he said to the emperor, well, there are 64 squares, 63 doublings. Give me 1 grain of rice for the first square, 2 grains of rice for the second, and just keep doubling 63 times. If the emperor had honoured his promise, he would have to plant the entire surface of the earth, including the oceans, twice over to grow that amount of food. And of course, I've heard at the Club of Rome meeting that we're now about halfway through that chessboard. So the really big changes have yet to come into effect. One of the things that we had at our conference in Rome, in Mexico last year, the Club of Rome meeting in Mexico, was the report on the Google car and the prediction that no one will be trusted to drive a car within 15 years. That in fact,
there's a lot of discussion about Tesla this year.
Yes, and Tesla, So there's a lot of interesting things that are happening. So with the Google car, as I leave this office to go, say, to the airport, I just call up a car, it comes to the front door, takes me to the airport, debits my bank account, and then it drives off to the next client, which means that I don't need to own a car, and so there'll be no need for car showrooms. Cars will be just a basic commodity.
Yes,
but of course this has tremendous labour implications, because there'll be a lot of jobs that'll go because of the reduced demand for automobile showrooms, etc. So for me it's very interesting, and that takes us back to the governance issue, because when I raised this issue in Australia about what are we doing about computers, and we're looking at 15 years into the future, I get statements from politicians privately saying, look, I've got an election to fight next year. I'm not worried about 15 years. I'll be retired in 15 years. I've got to think what's going to happen next year. And so part of our problem with our political system, and I think the media, my own colleagues, have got something to answer for here, but people are thinking short term and they're overwhelmed with immediate issues. Very few in governments are taking a long-term perspective about what the future of our society will be.
But there is a bit of a paradox that obviously there's more and more real-time data and metadata, and it's real-time, and obviously you're dealing more and more with real time, not even with short time.
That's right.
Never mind about long time. It may be probably, in my view, if complexity was to be or other things that will evolve from within that, having real time, you might be able or tempted to go to the long term, because the short term is more or less an operative. But the real time is something which, if there are many real time, you can immediately see the long term.
Well, I hope you're being optimistic. My fear is that people will be overwhelmed with data, and we're seeing that already with my own students who are unable now to read long books. They don't have long concentration spans. It's click and flick. And my worry is that you're going to end up with that becoming part of the political culture as well, when you're just thinking in terms of headlines, news grabs, and very few people thinking long term.
It's a lot of headlines, but one thing that was very much connected with prosperity within limits, as individuals, where do we go, collapse or otherwise, was the idea of bringing the Vatican in and hear what they think. I mean, I found, maybe you want to talk about this, the head of science and faith for Vatican. I mean,
For me, it was
what did you think?
That was an excellent session.
Yeah.
One of our members, Silva Zimmerman, knew the current Pope in his previous life in Argentina. She's from Argentina, and so she was able to set up this meeting where, as you say, this very distinguished Monsignor came along for the presentation. What was very interesting was the way that he said, here's the limits to growth, and this is Catholic social teaching for that pretty well that same period. Very interesting to see the similarities, not on the population issue, and he kept ducking that question naturally, but a lot of the other issues in terms of growth, but with justice and looking after the poor. These are issues that the Club of Rome have been talking about for over 40 years, and this is really, of course, what the Catholic Church has been on about through its own Catholic social teaching. So it was a very good session that we had.
But I think one other thing which was probably quite striking was the fact that we've been told, they are aware of it and they are dealing with it probably, that is Catholic Church or religion or other religions, they are actually very ancient. Before Einstein came about, before whoever came about, and they are aware about that because they are dealing with people who just take all these things built in stones, never mind that in the meantime so many things happen. And if they would be able to update, well, I don't know, I mean, it wasn't it that, I'm not saying that, but this is what the Monsignor was somehow either excusing or implying, that they're aware about the fact that.
But I think the essence of religious faith is really not something which Einstein would need to buy into.
No.
But in fact, certain things about seeing yourself as part of nature, not a part from it, but very much part of it, inside nature. And this is something which you find in all the world's major religions. And this is what the Catholic representative was talking about. That there was
it's not just Catholic,
it's all the way across. All the world's religions have a view of humankind being within the bubble of planet Earth. And therefore you have responsibilities to take care of the planet Earth. So my view is that if you look after the planet will look after you.
Yourself. So that's a very... Anyway, I mean, within the SMAP partnership, probably we are optimistic. So within the limitless, we recognize there are limits. But the idea of SMAP partnership is this kind of caring and long term, and making sure that prosper thy neighbor. And then of course you can go further.
Absolutely. I think if you go back to Moore's law and the power of computers, we're about to mobilize the brain power of 7 billion people, because you know, you've got the widespread use now of computers throughout many other parts of the world. It's not just Europe and Australia and New Zealand. So what is interesting is the way that for a long time the planet has been governed by a very limited brain power resort, which is stale, pale males, old white men. Now we're about to mobilize the brain power of 7 billion people as they get access to the $100 computer in Africa. In fact, I was very impressed to see that you've got more phones in Africa than you've got in the United States. Of course. And they do mobile banking, etc. Whole new world opening up.
And there was, I was mentioning to you that, and we're going to share with colleagues this week, the African scientists involved in genomics. They were the other days who the well-known scientist Julia in Tanzania. We've been invited to the Royal Society, where the Pfizer Prize was for genomics given among kind of 50 or so African scientists in Royal Society. So things are changing quite a lot. So well, I suppose that was a very, very good evidence, as it happened, for the kind of interfaces the international networks levels between ours and others, which are being kind of signaled into these highlights of CPTM members at work, which have been sent to everybody, including for the Commonwealth heads of government in Malta and to come, and about which probably in the next 2-3 weeks I will go in depth so that great value is being taken at the national level from the various documents that have been put together. But thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you.
And, hope you enjoy Oxford. You are
lovely. I'm at Oxford at the moment on research fellowship.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
And,
thank you.
Hope to hear from you from Australia. Your podcasts, radio, and other things
indeed.
that you are excellent at.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed.
Okay.